So anyway, let's move up the tree. I need to move out of the Stone Age because we've got to go to the next era. So if I go back to the infographic. Right, so it stays like that for a long time, doesn't it? This sort of Venus figurines, they keep appearing consistently for thousands of years, I believe.
Yes. So the Venus figurines start dying out when humans start making communal places to live, places that are permanent settlements.
Yeah, which takes us nicely to Göbekli Tepe, which I've put in the middle of the biggest branch on the entire tree. You can see I've got lots of major branches everywhere. The reason I did that is because archaeologically, it's a very significant site because it's the first megalithic structure we've ever made. That I don't think there's anything before that, is there?
There is.
Yes, another Göbekli, isn't it?
There's a more tepes. Yep, and we know we were building stone houses about 16,000 years ago. Okay, so this is all happening. Yeah, definitely. There's,
okay.
And so communities are being built, and so we move away from animism and start thinking about gods. And I think that's what happens is if you're in a community, your thinking changes as to if you're in the wild, in nature. And so your gods become more like what you want them to be, which is other people. And so they become personified, which is why I don't think Venus figures are necessarily goddesses, because you didn't think about that personification that of a god. So they might represent something else.
Okay. So how good are you on the Göbekli Tepe sort of period? Is that
absolutely rubbish? It's not my. I mean, I've read a lot, but I wouldn't want to answer any academic questions about it.
It was from what I read, it wasn't necessarily agricultural quite at this point, although it was starting to go that way. It was very much a hunting sort of when you study the
There's
rock
still
art.
hunter gathering going on. So people need to understand how farming works. So we didn't just suddenly one day say, oh, we're going to stop hunter gathering and we go farming. What we started to do is we started to eat grasses about 20,000 years ago, and then as time went on, we initially ate just a little bit of grass, but as time went on, we started to cultivate grass. So by 15,000 years ago, maybe 10-15% of the grasses we ate were cultivated, we knew where they were growing. And so by 10,000 or 12,000 years ago, so Göbekli Tepe, maybe 50% of the grasses we were eating was being farmed. And certainly by 10,000 years ago, 8,000 BCE, it was a good 80% to 90% of the grasses, and that's when farming really took off. And when we see dispersals from the Near East go to other parts of the world, certainly into Europe and Greece and the northern Mediterranean.
So that would be a major incident in human history. And then I've got a branch coming off in both directions, one going into the Middle East and one going into Europe. So we'll stick with Europe for now, but. We've got still a fertility symbol here by the look of it. There's are you familiar with the Lipinski verse symbol?
Is that the totem?
It's got
totem. The Slavic. I think it was
9,500 BCE.
Yes.
So still a bit of fertility symbolism going on, and same here. That's interesting. The Megara cave.
Yeah, the weird thing about the totem, not weird, and certainly at this point is. Many of the things made were wood. So there just aren't records of them. So it may be that there were wooden totems going back 50,000 years.
Yeah. That's what I've always thought the same thing. There's the Shigir idol, 9,500 BCE, made of wood, preserved amazingly. Was it in a peat bog?
Yes, most of them would be.
Which is very rare. But I thought the same thing. I was like, well, if that was there, we could go back 20,000 BC, 50,000 BC. So I completely agree with that. Another interesting observation I got here is a feminine figure, potentially, it could be masculine, but it's got its arms raised in the air. That becomes a common symbol, doesn't it? So that's the Megara cave. I think it's Spain. I'll have to look into that. 8,000 BCE. And if we go up here, we see it appearing again in ancient Egypt. And then I think it appears again in a couple here we are, in the Minoan period. It's just strange, the raised arms in the air. The Berber people have the same thing, so it seems to be a common motif that appears.
Yeah, so this is where we need to actually think about how many poses do humans really have. They have hands next to them or hands in the air.
Have you seen the Kama Sutra? Have you read the Kama Sutra?
Oh, well, I've looked at the pictures.
There's many poses, mate. Many poses.
But I mean, as sculpting, as designing, there's basically two stances a person has. So I wouldn't read too much into the fact that there's a common stance, because otherwise you say, well, look, all these people have got their hands next to their sides and everywhere. And people have tried to say that with, oh no, look, these people have got 4 fingers and like there's this neck thing, like necklace, and you'll see like Göbekli Tepe and Maoris and Easter Island and things. They say, oh, they've all got this common look, and it's like
they all carry a bag. I've seen that appearing a lot.
Like, I think so. That, but it's like, well, humans have, if you look at how hands are, it isn't necessarily that surprising, because people want to link it back. Oh, there was just one art, one. We'll do a Graham Hancock thing here. One ancient culture that there's no trace of that went around the world and put these ideas in everybody's head. But that isn't, to me, that's not a very probable cause of why we see that. It's just
I'd like to push back on that a little bit. I'd like to push back because I've done a bit of sculpting myself, and some poses. If you're carving, I've carved a soft stone, and it breaks easily when you do the arms raised in the air and things like that. It's so annoying. It just breaks so easily. So it's actually quite an annoying pose to do. So when it's all one block and you carve the shape of the arms into it, that's so easy. It's much easier to do something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but once you've got your arms out, you've got so many different planes to move them, and you can have your arms forward with the hands out like this, for instance. You can have the hands cradling the face. You can have the arms just out straight. I can think of a myriad of symbols, but that it's just interesting. That one seems to appear in Europe and Africa, and all the areas that are related.
But the arms at the right, exactly the same angles, and the elbows bent exactly the same way.
I would say I would argue that it's enough to be compelling.
Consider your recent argument about how arms could be in different places. They're either exactly the same or they're different. I am yet to be convinced of that. I just think that is just a natural human perception of how to draw something. It's like we see graffiti from young children from 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, like in Roman like carvings and things like that, which show adults as a big sort of smiley face with big hands, like stick figures.
Yeah.
And you go to a nursery school today, and what do kids draw? Exactly the same thing. There's just a natural human perception of how. But also, we do. Kids copy each other when a certain form takes off, and you see them copying the same pictures and so on, and learning off each other doing that, which is, I guess, another reason, why they could follow similar patterns is simply because they're just copying each other, and they didn't think about. Nobody thought about doing the hand in front. If someone saw that, then because don't forget, people were travelling around. I mean, humans didn't stay still; they migrated a lot. So if someone had a carving of a woman with her hands in the air, and someone said, "Oh, that looks really good. That's a nice new pose. Let me make one of those."
I'd be interested. It's a shame we haven't got the. I would love to see the wooden sculptures they must have made, and I'm sure they must have done it. But just to think, all this art that'd been lost in time, such a shame. Right, so coming back out again, I think we've got time to just about move into the agricultural age. So let's come back out. Okay, so that I've written down. This is Neolithic Europe, so we know it's the agricultural age. Yep. And we've got a lot of pottery appearing as well. So we've got the comb ceramic culture, the Ertebol culture. And then, interestingly, with the pottery and the figurines, we start getting more megaliths. And it really starts to kick off, doesn't it, in Europe with Karnak stones, Newgrange, Stonehenge, the Antequera megalithic site in Portugal, I believe. What's happening here? Why have we suddenly moved? I mean, obviously, it's interesting because Göbekli Tepe is so ancient. We're looking back at 10,000 BCE, but I haven't found much evidence for other megalithic sites except for the Nabta Playa, which is... Could you talk a little bit about the Nabta Playa site?
The Nabta Playa, that's the earliest... that's the earliest stone circle we know of, I believe. And it's meant to be representative of a calendar, and it's found in Nabta Playa in Egypt, which looks like a desert. But actually, when that was made, it was a lush green field and pasture. Right. So we may believe it has some agricultural reference in there, because agriculture was happening at the time in that area. So that's possibly where
that
that
makes
is
sense.
coming
That
from.
really makes sense. It's so this is going to be a common theme that starts to develop, isn't it? That the megalithic sites are a part of us marking how the cycle of agriculture works. So
Almost certainly. I mean, so people call it a calendar. I mean, it isn't a strict calendar, I guess, but it also represents something else as well, which we'll talk about in a minute.
okay.
The other thing we need to know about the pottery, which you mentioned, is that because I talk about how archaeologists call things rituals when they don't understand them, what we do is we label cultures by the pottery they make and the patterns on the pottery, because there isn't really anything else there we can use to label them. So we do have to be careful when we say someone's like the corded-ware peoples. We assume because they all have the same kind of pottery, they all believe the same kind of thing. But that is a really broad brush to throw across them. So we should be more nuanced if we wanted to really understand what's going on there.
And you get in some of these sites, although I've shown a picture of pottery, sometimes you get these little figurines of a horse, or again, there's a little man there. It could be a toy for a kid. We just don't know, do we?
It could be a votive offering. You get a lot of those starting to happen. So what we're finding here, so you say there's a long period of time between Göbekli Tepe at 10,000 years and, let's say, some of the megaliths, which are sort of 7,000 years old. So old, well, there isn't. Well, there is, but what you find is that it took the Near Eastern people quite some time to get into Europe. So they travelled it to Greece, and they were there in Greece by about 8,500 years ago. Okay, so 6,500 BCE. And then it literally took them another 1,000 years to work out, oh my God, what are these mountains and trees and fields here? Because that doesn't look like home at all. Home is lots of clay and stone and and sort of grassland. And there's a whole. So it literally took them 1,000 years, 1,500 years of staying still in Greece before they actually went into Europe, which would then coincide with when we start seeing, oh, well, there's all these stones here. Now, why are they building stone circles? That's interesting. So one, I think it helps with keeping track of time in the calendar and the seasons. But I also think it also informs certain beliefs. So, this is a sense of, I mean, you had stone huts in the Near East, but when you get into like the Germanic area and the middle of Europe, they're having to build houses from wood, and they have to clear forests to plant crops, and they probably have to clear stones. And someone's probably thinking, well, what do we do with these stones and this wood? And the wood, so the earliest henges are built from wooden poles, and then that then changes into stones, and the stones, as I say, can inform calendar, because people would have seen these stones and see how the shadows change through time, and then they start associating certain times of the year with certain things. And so whilst most people go to Stonehenge and celebrate the summer solstice because it's the longest day of the year, it's almost certain that the biggest festival or feast going on at Stonehenge, because there were feasts there, is actually the winter solstice, where night was the longest, because that's when you were close to your ancestors and the dead. And we got many, many stories that then come about, the longest night and being close to the dead and all the things that happen. Eventually Halloween springs up, from sort of Christian influenced Celtic. It's hard to see exactly how it happened, but I think the clearing of the forest, all this wood, the clearing of the fields and the stones that come up, what people did things with the spare wood and stone, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Just out of interest then, what kind of religion were we looking at here? So this is, can we say confidently that it's polytheistic at this point now?
So they'd be near, so it'd be in effect an evolution or a sort of a corruption of the Near Eastern religion. So there will be a pantheon of gods and personified gods, so gods as people in there at that point.
But we would likely have the agricultural myths as well, wouldn't we? Which is going to be things like
the agricultural myths, yeah.
Yeah. Can you give us a flavour of that? Just give us a little broad overview.
So the agricultural myth is you tend to start the world with a chaotic void, a chaotic ocean, and then a number of gods come along and they have wives and children, and the children kill the father and sleep with the mother to have a daughter, who then they sleep with to have another child, who then kills that male, and you get this whole family feud, I call it, going on for a few generations, which sort of establishes a sort of a heritage for the divinity that does remain. And so we see that, and we see various acts of that going on, and mutilation, and the mutilation often happens with a sickle, which again is a real nod to agricultural people. And then there's various stories about how the outcast male then tries to come back, and it doesn't work, and success happens. But there's a lot of castration in there, and a lot of incest, matricide and patricide.
Would we have a god or goddess going into the underworld at this point, where as they're taken away, the land on the surface withers and dies, and then somebody has to come down to get them back, which then creates the cycle?
Definitely, we get that. Yeah, so you have people who are familiar with Inanna and Ishtar, and you get those myths exist. We get them with Persephone, we get them even in Nordic culture with Baldur. They're all examples of agricultural gods, or gods that have been linked with agricultural myth because of the seasons. So that's definitely going on.
Okay. I've noticed when I was reading myths earlier on, when I first started doing this project, I noticed a huge similarity between the Osiris and Isis myth and Persephone and
yes, because they're pretty much the same.
Yeah. To the point even where there was this point in both stories where they ended up in another kingdom, and they ended up burning a child to make that child immortal. But then the parents of that child, when they saw the ritual being done, they were so horrified they stopped the ritual. And then the goddess would say, "What have you done? I was about to make this child immortal." Is that? Do you know much about that myth? And is it attached to this agricultural myth?
Yeah, that's definitely an agricultural myth. And the evolution is clear. So when I talk about the Near Eastern creation myth and how it evolves, the other myths would have come along with it, including the underworld myth. And that's a really common myth. And the underworld myth is a nod to agriculture and an understanding of seasons and the cycling of seasons. And so in Egypt, it's kept with the brother and sister, and it's Dumazid and I can't remember his sister's name. But you don't always get it. Sometimes you just get one person to go in the underworld for a period of time. And in some myths, you get one person going in the underworld permanently. So it does change, but that myth is already there, that season's there, and that is why you get the winter solstice being close to death as the most important of the festivals, and where we start seeing bodies buried in stone tombs and things like that.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And going back to tombs, again, megalithic culture, they're abundant, aren't they? We start building lots of stone tombs. Who are these for? Who are we building these huge megalithic tombs? What are they called? A kind of, it's the one with the three stones underneath and a capstone on top.
Yeah. So they're the sort of the last of the agricultural peoples building that, and you'll find things simplify. So all the time you see religion get simplified because no one can really be bothered to do the ritual. So as we get nearer to the current day, rituals get simplified. So we used to sacrifice hundreds of cattle and even people, and slowly you're sacrificing goats, then just chickens, then just a little object, and now you go to church and say, "Please forgive me," and all your sins have gone. You don't have to sacrifice anything. So.
You sound almost like we should go back to the old days. We put more effort into it back then. We slaughtered 1,000 sheep.
If you want to believe in a god, then believe in a god.
That's fair enough.
Do it properly.
But to be more impressive, I guess. Okay.
Exactly. So so you see stone circles slowly get simpler and simpler, and stop being maintained, and in effect, they too then generate myth because you like mythology.
Yes.
And I see that the change, because there's a rapid change in culture. So the Indo-Europeans start turning up around 4000 BCE.
We'll finish on them actually, if that's okay. But yes, they were just about here.
And when they turn up, you get this culture change, and people then wonder who built those stone circles. The Indo-Europeans then give the plague to all the agricultural people who've never really handled animals before, and half of them die out in Europe. Indo-Europeans come in, and that starts the next wave of your chart.
But yeah, so we've got all these Stonehenge sort of megalithic areas here, but just cutting across sideways, 4,500 BCE. This is your specialist subject. The Proto-Indo-Europeans begin to emerge.
Well, the Indo-Europeans emerge. They're not Proto. Proto is the language they speak.
Right. Okay. The Indo-European people. My question is, what distinguishes these people? Because they go on to really change the cultural sort of dynamic of Europe, don't they?
They do.
Who are they, and what kind of religion were they practicing, and what did they do to change the rest of the social religious landscape?
Well, okay, so big question. So when the Near East people, the agricultural people, came into Europe, they came as families, and they settled down in communities, and there was enough diversity in the number of people there that they could happily grow as culture. Okay, so when the Indo-Europeans then turn up, they're very patriarchal, and so what happens is that when the father of the family dies, the eldest son takes over the father's land, and the other children, the other males, have to leave. And they basically went to warrior school, for want of a better word. They joined like a warrior cult and learned how to fight. And eventually some of these would travel into Europe. But there was just a band of males. They're not going to get anything done. So what do they have to do? They have to take women from the local culture. So they take hunter-gatherer women, and they take agricultural women and mate with them, and that causes a real merging of myth and culture and DNA. We've got lots of DNA evidence to show that anybody of European heritage has a combination of early European farmer, Indo-European and hunter-gatherer DNA within them.
So that's a dark side, isn't it, to the history of the Indo-Europeans, because there's a rate within the culture is actual rape and pillaging and
well they say it's just males turning up. So what does they have to survive, and so that's how they survived.
Right. And so they didn't seduce the women and be nice and give them flowers. They just took them, and there was a sense of
not the first group. Once they had communities settled, there was probably it was far more civilized. They were it's noted within culture, certainly in Germanic culture, that they were very much monogamous. They were very, if you're married to your wife, you're married to your wife. You don't mess around. So there is some, underlying things there that once you had a woman, you were, loyal to that woman and looked after them and had a family.
When you watch documentaries, I've been watching on Netflix. There's a documentary at the moment about chimps.
Okay.
And you see different tribes within the chimp community doing just that: stealing children, stealing women, eating other children if it's not from their tribe, and they're like, well, I'm going to eat that one. So you do see this. I think sometimes people think that men are horrible and so on, but it's been in the DNA of hominids for God knows how long.
You need to survive and you need to breed.
Yeah,
they are the two drivers of life: survive and breed.
But obviously we live in a day and age where. Would you argue that we live in a day and age where this has gone because of religion? Would you say that the evolution of religion over thousands and thousands of years pushed back against the darker side of our instincts and our nature?
Just civilization.
Yes, but would you, if you were to narrow it down, because civilizations and culture.
So would I say the Roman Catholic Church, who hide paedophile priests within the Vatican, are they doing a good job at making the world a better place? Like that.
So no, but
sorry, that was a bit of a bias. Yes. Yeah.
But we could. I've been watching Ray Donovan recently, and it's that whole subject's completely embedded in that entire storyline. But that it's. I mean, you could call that the low-hanging fruit, isn't it? It's easy to go for those really horrible aspects of religion, but could we argue, on the whole, that it was as over time, many religions, not all of them of course, but many religions, especially I would say in the sort of axial era, started focusing on peace and kindness and love and loving your neighbour and so on. And it just seemed that I don't necessarily think those are things I read in the older
the church. Charlemagne committed genocide in the name of Christianity to convert people. Convert or die. I wouldn't necessarily say that was progress compared to just turn up and we need somewhere to live and somewhere to breed.
Where do you think we got our moral, ethical sort of background that made us, I would argue now, more civilized, better people? Would you say it was more? You think it was okay? Explain that. Unpack that one for me. Okay, so the threat of the gun.
It's like the nuclear deterrent. Why hasn't there been a world war since the nuclear bomb?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah. So that he with the biggest gun can force peace
upon everybody.
There comes a
point. When the gun's so big, you don't want to be shot.
Okay. So would you argue then? I mean, I'm going to be talking to lots of different people, and I might put you on the extreme end of the spectrum. But would you argue then that religion doesn't necessarily bring a moral, ethical guidance for people that softens our nature and makes us more agreeable with one another? Would you say that maybe it didn't achieve that in its lifetime?
Right, so let me be very fair here. There are a majority of individuals who are religious who are very good people. Absolutely. However, it is the organisation of the religious organisations and the political powers that relied on the power of the religious organisation that were very corrupt.
I mean, you could argue that power is the problem, which goes back to the gun being the problem. You could say that actually the gun's been the biggest problem. I mean, yes, nukes have kind of created proxy wars rather than world wars, but you could argue that the problem is still that we have the gun. We still have this as an issue. You don't think that religion could get us out of this, that religion has a way to lead us back to being more loving, caring, ethical people?
You don't need religion for that, no. In fact, I would argue there's, is it people of religion who have caused that, some horrific crimes?
Well, I'd love to unpack this in time. I don't know enough about the history of it, but I do get a sense that a lot of the worst things committed in the name of religion is done by individuals in power, and I do sometimes think that power is the corrupting element. Yeah,
because the church was powerful. I mean, the Roman Empire turned into the Roman Catholic Church. So it had all the power, all the links, all the, all that, and people wanted that. People wanted the money of that church, so they could buy armies and have power. And then the church said, "Fine, but you have to convert to us and give us money, to do that." In effect, it was a business. It was almost like a mercenary business. Church gave kings money to buy armies to kill people, and so everybody in the land then became members of the church.
What's your views on religions like Buddhism, which brings along the sense of you can connect to something greater than yourself? You just, you're just too focused on the ego self, and if you actually meditate and disassociate yourself with your life and your physical body, you become aware of something greater than yourself.
I think that's. I think. So we've been really focusing on the Abrahamic religions when we talk about religion in the Indo-European capacity and the effect. I think Buddhism and even Hinduism to a degree are very different, and whilst they have their own peculiarities, I think they are far more peaceful and loving than any Abrahamic religion.
And why do you think, again, in sort of evolutionary terms, because my tree, by the way, I used to call the tree of religion the evolutionary tree of religion. That's what I think it was its first name when I brought it out, because I just noticed how it evolved over time. So obviously with evolution, there's the survival of the fittest. So we've lost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of religions over thousands and thousands of years. So the ones that are still with us today, you could argue, are the survival of the fittest.
No, it's survival of the fittest. It's survival of the ones that can change the quickest.
Okay.
That's probably a better, and that's true. That's why we've had so many flavours of Christianity, because if one doesn't survive, someone creates another one that might survive. It's just a business model at the end of the day.
So do you think some religions are still with us today, but are going to, like a vestigial tale, just eventually disappear? Or do you think they're still serving people? Why do you think that we still have them? And let's be fair, it's I think Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, they're still a huge part of millions or billions of people's lives. So they're still with us. Why do you think they're still here in a world of enlightenment and science and progress in terms of technological and material progress? Why do we still have these religions here?
If I answer that honestly, I might get cancelled. So a majority of people aren't ready to, many people aren't fully responsible. They don't want to be fully responsible for their lives and their outcomes.
I think we should be clear. You're an atheist, aren't you, John? So
well, I have beliefs. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm religious per se, but there are aspects of the culture of certainly Indo-Europeans that I really love. In terms of the understanding of immortality and how they treat the world and the cosmos as a cycle. You give what you take and things like that. There's aspects of that I really.
So those are principles. Those are principles that you find that are useful. You have utility to them. But what about a belief in something greater than yourself? That is something that is mysterious and that gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Do you have a sense of that at all?
Unfortunately, I don't think. No. I would. It's a different discussion, but no. The greatest God in my world is me.
Fair enough. The greatest God.
In terms, if I had to apply that sort of thing, I'm responsible for my own well-being and my family, and my friends' well-being. Nothing else.
Your sense of agency comes from,
but it's me who makes those decisions and looks after. So I'm not going to blame it on some chocolate teapot or whatever imaginary thing you've got to worship. No,
I was going to say the spaghetti
monster. Yes,
the spaghetti monster. Do you know what? I haven't added that on my tree, and I think I should. I actually think that needs to go on the tree. So I wanted to dig a bit deeper. I've just talked about the spaghetti monster, and now I've lost my trail of thought, John. This is
so
easy.
Indo-Europeans. What religion did they believe? So their gods were more warlike and aggressive, and the difference in culture is they were more pastoral farmers. So they got their food from, in effect, herding animals, mainly cattle. And so cattle were really important to them, and we see that in many Indo-European influenced cultures. The cow was a big thing before the horse became available to ride. And the Indo-Europeans also were the first culture really to take advantage of the will. So if they have the will and they have cattle, it allowed them to farm better and further. It allowed them to travel into Europe. It allowed them to trade with agricultural people, then give them the plague and then invade Europe. Well, they did. So
that's right.
They got rid of a significant amount of their population there. Then they came into Europe with their gods. And what is fascinating is if you look at certain pantheons, you can still see the split today between the agricultural gods and the war gods. So in the Nordic culture, you have the Aesir, which are the Indo-European war type gods, and the Vanir, which are very agricultural gods. Even in the Olympians, we see certain gods like Demeter taking a back seat because she's agriculturally focused, a Mother Earth type god rather than Zeus. And there's others.
They stepped out Hebe for Dionysus, didn't they? So he was like, check out.
Get changed like that. And Hittites, who were very Near East influenced, they had earth gods and sky gods in effect. And you get this split in the,
Have you ever meditated?
No. I don't think my brain could sit still long enough to deal with that.
Have you ever danced for hours and hours on end until you've gone into a trance state?
No, because I'm too busy working and reading and writing essays and papers.
Have you taken psychotropic substances to experience a deep connection with nature?
I hate even being drunk because I'm not in control of my brain. I have to be in complete control of my brain.
So what have you done to explore the world of this mysterious thing that we call religion and mysticism and spirituality? Have you ever sort of gone...
Apart from 30 years of research, I have found happiness, bliss. I have found pure bliss and happiness. And I have got that from, one, writing good computer code.
Yeah, okay.
and two, uncovering myths and motifs that haven't been discovered and recreating stories that have been lost for
there is a feel. I know what you mean. When you have a little eureka moment, and you put something together, and you're just like, oh my God, that's amazing, and you get a thrill from it. I get that. Yeah.
And those things. So I'll have some books out hopefully in the next 2 or 3 years, and they'll be down in history, and hopefully, my fame will not decay, which as Europeans would say, I'll be remembered by some mythologists and people who are interested, by adding some value to the world.
Yeah. I mean, my followers know, Jon's got a website, the Myth Database. Yeah. And I will be linking, so just to give people a quick idea, if I click on my infographic again, I will be linking, as long as you're okay with this, the Tree of Religion to Jon's website. So if you for instance, will come up here to the upper branches, say now you want to study Celtic polytheism. If you click on it, on the online version I'm going to create, you'll be able to have a brief overview of the Celtic culture, the beliefs, the doctrines, the rituals and festivals they had. And the myths, but it's going to be, it's a wiki, so it won't be, massively in depth. But if you really want to dig into the myths and the pantheons, they can go to Myth Database and read the entire story. Is that right? So they can read it all in detail.
Mythology database, there'll be flavours of stories. It's got some whole stories in there. Often it is referencing of how stories are linked and where they come from and sources. And if you're a patron, you can actually see where all the myths are told across the world.
Yeah.
Particular types.
Right. Well, there we are. So let me just bring myself back. Thank you very much, Jon. It's been an absolute pleasure. And are you okay, Jon, if we return to the tree another time? Because I would like to discuss the other branches. So I'll just quickly go over where we were. We've pretty much climbed halfway up the tree. So we've done from the base down here up to about the Indo-European culture from 4000 BC. But I wanted to explore all the different variations of that culture. So that would be the Greco-Roman culture, Slavic, Baltic, Norse, and so on. Mm-hmm. And then I'd like to talk about the advent of Christianity and how it affected the cultural, religious landscape of Europe. And then I wanted to talk, so there's the cross there of the Christianity, literally just taken over all of Europe. But at the top, you can see I've got a lot of these neo-pagan movements, which I
true and the like. Yes.
Yeah, I thought it'd be interesting discussing those. So that means we're halfway through. Are you okay to do another bash at this in a week or so? Brilliant.
Absolutely. So enjoy this.
I much appreciate that then, Jon. All right. Well, thanks for chatting to me, and I will catch you in the next session on Faithscape.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.